Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu, and I started my quest searching for the meaning of freedom and boiled it down to four types: time, freedom, location, and health. And once I got that, I started to scour the globe looking for people embodying those different types of attributes. So today, I'm happy to have a guest, Gemma Bailey, and she dubs herself, she's got an alternative view on psychology, and she's had a great deal of success, and she's ready to share it with the world. She's also a podcast host of People Building, and so it's going to be a fascinating conversation on mindset, state, and personal productivity. So I'm happy to welcome Gemma. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I know you're calling from the UK and we had connected through Podmatch. So tell the audience how you got started, your story, and we'll dive into the conversation.
Okay, wonderful. So I did not start out as an entrepreneur. Starting block was I worked with very young children as a nursery nurse. So I was working in daycare type facilities. And I think fundamentally the reason why I went into that area of work is because I thought that by working with future generations and influencing, the children who are going to build our future, that I would be changing the world in some way. The reality was I just ended up changing lots of diapers. So it did not go in the direction I was hoping. And I also realized during that time that I was a terrible employee. I had a really bad pattern of spending around 3 or 4 months in a job. And in that time, I would master the routine and figure things out. And as soon as I'd done that, I was bored. And I would start creating trouble for myself. And sometimes that trouble was well managed by the employers. They'd give me certain projects to do or new responsibilities. And so that would maybe keep me there a little bit longer. But other times, I would just end up job hunting again and sort of looking for the next challenge. And as it happened, so I was actually taken ill with appendicitis, which gave me a break from work, because back in those days, if you got appendicitis, you were sort of signed off for a month. It was quite a big operation. So I had a month of at home watching daytime TV, and I happened to see something in one of those daytime TV shows about a methodology called neuro linguistic programming, so NLP, which is sometimes used as an alternative to cognitive behavior therapy. It's sometimes used in education for helping people to be better communicators, leaders, managers. You're able to model skills that other people have and install them in yourself. So there are lots of very appealing things about it. And at that time, I thought, I think I might need that. So I started sort of looking into it as a self-development tool. And I also came across hypnotherapy at that time. And eventually I signed up for a course so that I could learn these strategies. So I qualified as an NLP practitioner and a hypnotherapist, then kind of expanded my journey from there, going on to become master practitioner and a trainer. And eventually I started to work with some clients. And further on down the line, after I'd set up my first company, People Building, so that one is an NLP and hypnotherapy training company with lots of products associated with that. I have hypnosis audios that are now sold on iTunes, so the world over. Later I realized that all of those skills that I'd developed as a nursery nurse years and years ago could actually come in handy in my work as an NLP practitioner. And I set up my second company, which is NLP for Kids, where we work with children and young people who typically have not had the success that they were looking for from mainstream therapeutic solutions, or they maybe didn't meet the criteria to receive funded help to be able to get them the support that they needed. And so these are people that are looking for another way forward. And so I set up NLP for Kids as a franchise where I train other people how to use these skills. I later developed a non-profit company as well. So there's a few different things going on under the umbrella these days. But essentially, that's where I started, and that's more or less where I am now.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting because this whole field of how you can. I love you focus and train your neural networks to focus on what the outcome that you want to achieve. NLP is one method, and it's interesting how you can use language and emotions and feelings and representations to change your state fast. And what's interesting is we're all governed by unconscious patterns, and the more aware we can become, we can get triggered. So, and some people just get stuck. They get triggered and they just get stuck. They can't get out.
Yeah.
How do you change your emotional state fast so you can get on with your life and get past your triggers and all of that?
Yeah, well, I'd say if it's fast as in more or less quick fix type stuff, there are some things that can help. So I guess my go-to is always around how are you talking to yourself in your head? Like if you've got a bad feeling, it's probably got something to do with some bad thinking. And it might be that there are just too many thoughts and that it's overwhelming. So one of the things I talk to people about and help them to develop is what we might call meta thinking, where it's more like you're thinking about your thinking. So you kind of like looking at, what is going on in here, and are all of these thoughts valid, and are they true? Do they make sense? Should I really be spending my time and energy here? So looking at the quality or the quantity of the thoughts can be helpful. And sometimes with that, people forget that when you talk to yourself in your head, and if you've just wondered, what does she mean when I talk to myself in my head? It's that thing you just did. So when you talk to yourself in your head, you also have a tone of voice in there. And some people are really good at beating themselves up with a big stick inside their own head because their tonality is far more brutal than they would ever use with anybody in a real life scenario. So sometimes we just need to make an adjustment to that tone of voice, just to shift that can really alleviate some of that emotional weight that we're applying to ourselves. The other thing that works as a quick fix for changing your emotional state is your physiology. So there's a kind of triad going on here between your thoughts, your feelings, and what you're doing with your body. So, for example, as a massive sweeping generalization, someone who's depressed is often going to be perhaps a bit more slouched in their body. So they're not breathing as deeply and they're kind of hunched over like this. And then, if you try and take a deep breath when you're like this, hunched over, you probably only get about 20% of your lung capacity, which means you're not oxygenating your brain, which means you're not going to think clearly. So some of that's just, simple physics in a way. Think about what you're doing with your body. If you want more energy, for example, sometimes you have to give yourself that little push and actually move more, because then your body will respond to that and you'll start to create more of the adrenaline and the rush that you're looking for. So think about what your body's doing, even things like where your eyes go. There is somewhat of a correlation between where your eyes are going and what's going on in your head. If your eyes are going down, typically you're talking to yourself or you're feeling things. Whereas if your eyes are going up, that tends to be where we go for recalling information, or if we're being a bit more creative, visualizing stuff, for example. So if you put your eyes in a different physical location, you may even be able to start shifting some of that unwanted state that way too. So thoughts, I would say, look at those. And the other one I would say is think about what you're doing with your body, because making some small shifts there can actually make quite a rapid change.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I love that this idea of snapping out of it. Like sometimes sudden bursts of just like wind sprints or like a cold shower or something. Just like snap your mind, take you to a different these changing the stimuli around you. You talk about thinking positive doesn't work, and there's this whole self-development industry, all these gurus, and why doesn't it work, and what how can the industry evolve and move forward?
So I think my biggest gripe with the self-development industry is around that idea of, if we just slap a load of positivity on stuff, everything's going to be fine and dandy. It will all be sunshine and rainbows. And the reality is that, there's always going to be a part of your mind that knows if you are being disingenuous. So if you say to yourself, I'm feeling great today, when you're not, and you think, well, if I just embed that affirmation hard enough and as many times as possible, then eventually my brain will buy into it. Well, actually, your your brain is more likely to go, you're a liar. I don't feel good today. So you want to get that balance right between being positive, but also being authentic and genuine about it at the same time. And if there's a problem, you're better off addressing the problem rather than trying to divert yourself away from it with the distraction of positivity, which isn't actually accurate in those circumstances. So I think it's really important that people are honest with themselves about where they're at. But in being honest about where you're at that day, it also means you don't catastrophize, because that's a lie as well. So if things are bad, you don't say it's a disaster, because it's not a disaster. It's just bad. And you don't say it's amazing if it's not amazing, because equally that's a lie. You just say this is bad. But then you can also do other things like tell yourself it's bad right now, which adds on the idea of it being temporarily bad. You're not locked into bad forever. So it's just about having a bit more of a realistic approach around things. And I think the self-development industry is often too keen to move forward faster than perhaps people's own neurology and emotions are ready for them to do. If you're going through a difficult experience or you're grieving in some way, you have to process that. You can't just put the icing on the cake and hope for the best.
Yeah. And then you reference this idea of, good and bad. If we, I guess, we're conditioned by mainstream to, always be this, everything has to be good. Everything has to be picture perfect. But then if you actually look on the undersurface of all these people that have like a quote perfect life, there's a lot of skeletons. So is good things versus bad things? Is interpretation and how to make the best of bad situations?
Yeah. And, I think part of what you're talking about there as well is we're shaped a lot more by social media now than we ever were in the past, right? So you look through your Instagram feed and it does look like everyone else around you is having the perfect time. Like their life is amazing. And like you say, you don't know what's going on. Like, what are the skeletons in the closet for that person? Because they're maybe not going to talk about that. And then if they do, then maybe even that's not genuine. That could just be virtue signaling or something else. You don't really know. And so we end up in this sort of catch-22 of like a cultural ADHD, where we're really hooked into the idea that these people's lives are genuine and we're all missing out. They're all having a great time when we're not. We're making this sort of really unhealthy, negative comparison, like it's really not serving us in some way. And actually, you're better off having really genuine conversations with people that you're actually close to, more human-like interaction with people, so that you can have a better idea of gauging where you're at compared to others. And then you don't have to make those comparisons that are, just based on things not being realistic in the first place.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about perception, because, sometimes basically, we have stimuli and they could be, quote, interpreted as good or bad. But, after a lot of introspection, I realized that if you change your perspective, it's like, you have that situation, but it's labeling good or bad. How do you expand upon that?
Yeah, so we have a saying here in the UK, and I don't know if this is the world over, but every cloud has a silver lining. And I think there is some value in that idea. And for me, what it means is that a bad or negative situation can happen, and you can either take that and go, well, that's a cloud, or you can say, well, maybe there's something around that might be helpful to me in some way. So you can still acknowledge that this is a bad situation, but if you have the mindset of maybe this has saved me from something much worse, maybe this was a good diversion for me, maybe this is a lesson that I'm going to really feel has value at some point in the future that I don't even know about yet. So if you can kind of look out for indications that this negative situation may have value, even if it doesn't mean that it makes you feel good, or even if it doesn't have a really positive payoff, but just that there's something useful in there. I think useful is a really good way to process difficult situations, is like, what can I take from this that might be useful for me? people can look over whole periods of their life and say, that was a horrible time. That was really difficult. No good person should go through that. And always think of it in a very negative way. But if you ask yourself what was useful about that, it could be the thing that was developing your resilience and your thicker skin that you're going to need in 3 years' time, and you don't even know it yet. And where other people might have a breakdown in response to that future situation, you're going to be okay. So I always think if you can have that perspective of, how can I find the use from this situation? Then that helps you to not necessarily put the positive spin on it, but definitely to dissolve some of the negativity that might be there.
Talk a little bit about how to, especially in these days, resiliency is really important. Just everything going on. How do people keep going? And why do, some people just, they don't take action, they have all the information out there, and taking action would be good for them. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I was having this conversation with someone the other day. I was actually on a flight. And so a friend of mine had said to me, you really kind of you can be a bit antisocial, because I'd said about when I travel, I'll just kind of like lock into my iPad. I'm not going to talk to the people next to me. And they're like, God, you're so antisocial sometimes. So I kind of challenged myself on this flight, and I thought, you know what? He looks sane, so I'm going to have a chat with the man next to me. And actually, I think I've ended up making a friend for life. So we were having this really good chat on the way back, and he was interested in psychology, and I've just completed my psychology master's. So we were sort of discussing that. We were pondering the question of, why is it that sometimes people can see what they need to do? Like it's very obvious, perhaps the changes or improvements that they might want or need to make, but they don't do it. Like, what is that? And I compared it to how I might, for example, be sat in my lounge in the evening watching TV, and then like there'll just be a tiny breeze in the air, and it will catch a cobweb which is hanging from the corner of the ceiling. And I'll suddenly think, oh, I must get the duster out because that cobweb's really annoying. And then the next night, I've forgotten about it, and it catches that cobweb, it's still there. And it might go on perhaps maybe a couple of weeks of me going, cobweb. And eventually it's like the cobweb just kind of blurs into the background. And by that stage, it's become more like willful blindness. Like, I know it's there, but I don't want to have to deal with it. So I'm just going to purposefully delete it from my experience so that I don't have to put in the effort to deal with it. Well, the thing is that people do that all the time in their lives. And you think at the time it's easier, like it's easier for me to not bother with the cobweb right now. But after 2 weeks of that, I've put more energy into 2 weeks of deleting the cobweb than I would have spent just getting the duster and dealing with the cobweb in the first place anyway. And so I think what people can benefit from doing is avoiding the putting things off, avoiding the procrastination, take action when the idea is there, because if you sit around for too long, then that willful blindness can quite easily kick in.
Yeah, interesting. Really fascinating conversation. It opened my eyes to, how you perceive the world. And, with everything going on, there's still a lot of good in the world, and there's a lot of people affecting change. How can people contact you, follow you, reach out to you, and see you on social media?
So the best places to find me are People. So that's the website where I have coaching and therapeutic solutions for adults and people who might want to even train in NLP or hypnotherapy. Plus, you'll find details about the People Building podcast there too. So that podcast is where I get to have conversations with extraordinary people. So people who have been through the most challenging life experiences, and not just survived, but actually gone on and thrived on the other side of it. If you're interested in the work that I do with children and young people and the work of the NLP for Kids team, then the website to go to is nl.org. So it's November, Lima, Papa, number 4, and then kids.org. Equally, all of our social media, so Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc., are just under the company names of either People Building or NLP for Kids.
And for the audience out there, Gemma's resources will be in the links and show notes. Be sure to check her out. She's on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, as well as her YouTube. And thanks so much for coming on to this show. I know it's a time difference in UK, and thanks for dropping a lot of knowledge and gems. And thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.